Good morning, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm David Nafsker, the Executive Director for the Conference of Great Lakes St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers, and glad that you could all join us today. We have got a terrific conversation about water infrastructure, and we're very pleased to be hosting today's session as a part of our Leadership Summit webinar series. We are hosting this series to talk about some of the most important issues facing the region, hearing some new and different voices, and hopefully coming together around some solutions that we can work on together. As you saw before we started, we're grateful to our many sponsors. We appreciate all of their support, and we'll be showing the slides again at the end of today's webinar. As I said, today's webinar will be focusing on water infrastructure. Our moderator will begin by making some introductory remarks, introducing our panelists. They will then give some brief presentations, and we look forward to your questions and answers that our moderator will be facilitating. If you have questions at any time, please enter them into the question box on the GoToWebinar interface, and our moderator and I will help to direct them to the appropriate person on the panel. Today's presentation is being recorded, and a recording of today's session will be available on our website at www.gsgp.org. You can also find the other webinars in the Leadership Summit series. Before I turn it over to our moderator, I would first like to welcome some brief remarks from Ridgway White. Ridgway is the president and CEO of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. As many of you know, the foundation has been very involved in issues related to water and water infrastructure, and we look forward to hearing from him. Ridgway?
Thank you, Dave, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for your interest in this session. As Dave said, I'm Ridgway White, President and CEO of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and we're pleased to be longtime sponsors of these leadership summits. First, I want to thank and congratulate the governors and premiers for convening this high-level set of meetings. At the Mott Foundation, we've always looked forward to gathering in person for these events. These meetings are a great opportunity to discuss critical issues facing the region and build relationships. We were looking forward to visiting Cleveland and learning more about how a great city is making the most of a wonderful asset, Lake Erie.
Yes, sir.
We hope. Yep.
Hey, good morning. Good time to catch up. I am on a call.
We're getting a little bit of feedback on the line. Preston, I think you may need to mute your line. And of course, for all the other panelists who are not speaking, if you could please mute. Apologies, Ridgway, please continue.
No worries. Hey, it feels like a live event. Anyways, in the past for us at the Mott Foundation, these meetings have helped set the agenda for the and for everybody, set the agenda for the region by identifying, examining, and illuminating solutions to the biggest issues and opportunities we face. And that's the case today with water infrastructure. In the Mott Foundation's hometown of Flint, the community learned painful lessons about what happens when government agencies fail to properly manage infrastructure or invest in updating it. We also were reminded that environmental racism and lack of equity play roles in how the government responds when crises hit. But today, there is reason for optimism and opportunity. We're seeing more money flowing from the government to modernize water infrastructure. And we're seeing attempts to make sure those funds are going first to the communities that are most in need. Places like Flint, Toledo, Benton Harbor, and other distressed cities. From the Flint water crisis, we learned the importance of a one water solution. that it is important to focus on source water protection down to the last mile and even people's taps. And it is equally important that water is affordable and accessible to all. To help achieve this, policymakers have provided more money to remove lead pipes, and even more funding is being discussed in Washington. We also learned that loan programs alone are not enough to help many underserved communities fix their infrastructure, especially when people are already struggling to pay their bills. Providing government grants instead of just loans and targeting assistance to those who need it most does make a difference. Finally, we learned that justice and equity demand that all people must share in the benefits of government programs. These are important lessons as government and society confront challenges like climate change and water safety, affordability, and infrastructure upgrades. So with that, I again want to thank the governors and premiers for focusing on these issues, and Dave Natsker and today's panelists. I'm especially proud that two of the panelists, Crystal Davis and Helen Johnson, represent organizations that Mott has long supported. I look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ridgway, and thank you to the Foundation for the important work that you're doing and supporting. We appreciate your partnership. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Director Liesl Clark of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Director Clark and Governor Whitmer have been leaders in tackling many of the issues that we'll be talking about today. We look forward to you moderating our session, and I will now turn it over to you, Director Clark.
Great, thank you, David. Appreciate that. And Ridgway, also appreciate the opening comments. Some of you may have been expecting Bruno from Indiana, Bruno Piggott. I'm going to play the poor man's Bruno Piggott for you here today. But I'm glad you've joined us. This is a really critical topic that, certainly we are digging into across the Midwest, importantly so in Michigan, and I'm excited for the discussion here today. So, of course, we're going to focus on racial equity, environmental justice, and inclusion in economically disadvantaged areas, which are such important components of our water infrastructure work. Between source water protection, drinking water infrastructure, and stormwater infrastructure, the challenges and issues across the region right now are many and diverse. Issues related to water infrastructure vary considerably among the states, provinces, and among the thousands of communities and water utilities in the region. But there are some common underlying components, including disinvestment in infrastructure and the challenges of making sure that we are raising up equity issues as we're trying to move the needle forward. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence governors and premiers have been working for many years on water infrastructure, tackling these decades-old challenges. In addition to the dozens of programs and billions of dollars focused on these issues within the states and provinces themselves, the governors and premiers have been acting as an umbrella to take collective action over the years. So in 2019, we at Michigan were involved in the resolutions that the Great Lakes St. Lawrence governors and premiers led on around lead service line replacement and PFAS. Of course, we know of the lead challenges, in particular in the Midwest region, certainly that we know of very truly in Michigan. And I know Secretary Cole will talk about those challenges in Wisconsin as well. Also this year, recently, the governors came together to write a letter to Congress around these critical issues and the need for investment. Since 2019, work on the Great Lakes Impact Investment Platform has had water infrastructure there as a critical theme. And then since 2008, the Council's been working on the Great Lake Compact, including regional water conservation and efficiency goals and objectives, and state and provincial programs. So the governors and premiers continue to work on their own states and provinces, within their own states and provinces on water infrastructure. But it's important that we are talking together, and that is one of the things that the council provides, is those regional opportunities to lift up the things that we are all facing, and then to work with our colleagues at the federal level in order to work to find solutions. The governors and premiers continue to engage with these regional leaders to identify new ways and new ideas to accelerate our work here. So that takes us to the conversation here today. We have a fantastic panel for you. I had a chance to check out the slides ahead of time, and I'm looking really very much forward to their presentations. So first, we're going to hear from Ms. Crystal Davis. She's with the Alliance for the Great Lakes, and she's going to talk about that regional funding picture. She's going to talk about major issues and strategies that can help us address the funding gap. Then we'll hear from Secretary Cole from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. He'll talk specifically about state issues and statewide challenges that he's having, making sure to reflect both on the rural and urban nature of some of these issues. Finally, we'll hear from Helen Johnson, who's with the Michigan Municipal League Foundation. She's going to talk about some of the effective strategies that we've seen in Michigan, as well as questions that we still have, and then think about what sort of models we might have for elsewhere in the region. Then after we hear each speaker present for about 8 to 10 minutes, we're really looking forward to your questions and to the back and forth. And so David and I are going to do our best to make sure that we take on the questions that we see as we go forward. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Crystal Davis. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Director Clark. Thank you to Ridgeway White for your continuous support, Director Clark, and our fellow panelists here today for the opportunity to present to you, and especially the Great Lakes St. Lawrence governors and premiers for this opportunity to weigh in on such an important topic. I would have preferred to welcome you to beautiful Cleveland. It's a wonderful day outside, but maybe next time. And so I am still happy to be in community with you today to talk about this issue. Oh, there it is.
Oh, Crystal, we can't hear you.
Having some trouble with the
Okay, there you go. We can hear you now.
Okay, great. So the Great Lakes are the backbone of our region's economy and give us all the gift of life and the water that we drink that is so vital to us. The Alliance for the Great Lakes is a 51-year-old nonprofit organization committed to all things water. We do our work and focus on a number of issues. We have a number of stewardship programs like our signature Adopt a Beach program. And our policy work really falls into 3 subject areas: aquatic invasive species, agriculture and water issues, and our drinking water issues, which I'm really proud of because it's an outgrowth and response to a community concern. We launched a tour, a community listening tour, and we heard from communities across the Great Lakes that water infrastructure, addressing aging water infrastructure, water affordability, and lead service line replacement were issues that deserved our attention. And so we've responded by including that work into our suite of priority issues. Slides aren't advancing. Okay, there we go. So water means business. I think metropolitan policy program experts Lynn Broaddus and Joseph Kane explained it best when they say water means business. 30 of our country's largest water utilities support up to $52 billion in economic output and 289,000 jobs annually. Millions of households, businesses, and industries depend on these water systems every day. So investing in water infrastructure ensures that these industries stay afloat, and more investment often means more jobs. So water makes economic sense. And I think that's important to really center the conversation, because so often we talk about the environmental side of things and the health side of things, but it also makes economic sense. All right. So between 15 and 22 million people nationwide, roughly the population of Florida, have lead contaminated drinking water. There's no safe level of lead in the bloodstream. And the most effective way to eliminate exposure to lead in drinking water is to replace public and private water service lines simultaneously. We know, I have this graphic here from the Healing Our Waters Coalition. Our drinking water and wastewater infrastructure is crumbling, and the EPA estimates that over the next 20 years, we're facing a price tag of $188 billion to address these needs. The Great Lakes states are the hub or concentration of most of our nation's lead service lines issues as well. And so it's really paramount that we look at this price tag, realize that we can make some progress and continue to move forward. So social, racial, and economic justice are inseparable from environmental justice. We cannot achieve our vision of a healthy Great Lakes enjoyed by all when systemic racism is allowed to permeate our society unchecked. I don't do a presentation where I don't talk about this because it's always relevant. When we talk about water infrastructure issues, it is an environmental justice issue. Over the last couple of years now, and I say that because time is relative, I never know how long ago something was now these days, but the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis has reinforced the deep connection between water and public health. Hand washing has been the vital public health advice to combat the virus. And you can't do that when you have your water shut off due to pollution or not being affordable. And so this pandemic has really tragically highlighted the inequalities that have already existed. It's not the great equalizer. And so this really deserves our attention. Any legislation must also work to reverse present inequities that exist. And so we see here that there are a number of federal investments, and it's all the talk now about what's going to happen in Congress, what's happening at the federal level. As you can see detailed here, there are a number of pieces of legislation moving forward where we're seeing progress being made and additional funds being dedicated toward these issues at the federal level, and we are grateful for that. We know that without a healthy planet, there can be no freedom or no justice. Big problems demand big coalitions, and the climate crisis is one of our biggest challenges yet. And while there has been increased attention at the federal level, we understand that its substantive change is going to require an all hands on deck approach with investment and policy advancement at all levels of government. So it's important to say that when we're meeting with our governors, because we're also having these conversations with our mayors, our county executives, and at the federal level as well. This includes acknowledgement of local capacity to handle the federal funds that are coming down, addressing outreach needs and flexibility to appropriately respond to community feedback. So I think it's also important to celebrate progress and invest in programs that work. And so often when we talk about water infrastructure, we talk about everything that's going wrong. And I think that's appropriate because that's a key part of trying to forge solutions. But we want to applaud states that have made significant advancements or made at least the commitment to address what they know is a prevalent issue. To the state of Michigan for the commitment related to replacing lead service lines, to Illinois for the recent passing of legislation related to lead service line replacement and creating plans for that. And then also New York with the recent investment of $600 million in water infrastructure grants. We have a long way to go, and all of this is not perfect, but we are moving in the right direction. I think it's also important to note that we have to invest in programs that work. I have the immense pleasure and privilege of working every day with community groups that are doing the work, that are passing out filters, that are educating residents and educating government officials about this work and the importance of this work. I work closely with We the People of Detroit and Junction Coalition and Milwaukee Water Commons, who are doing this and really are the unsung heroes of this movement. And I think we have to make sure that we're talking to our communities and environmental justice leaders about what we need to do to move forward. And so often I say when we talk to government officials, it's incumbent upon us to talk about, now this is what I need you to do. And guess what? That's still going to happen today. I'm still going to ask you to do some things, but I want to switch it around and first detail what are we willing to do as being support to government, as being a resource for you in this fight or movement towards creating an environmentally just water system. We are going to, as nonprofit organizations and as the Alliance for the Great Lakes, I can speak only for our organization, we are going to advocate for increased funding at all levels of government. We're going to build coalitions that go across different sectors and races so that we can build the power to win. We're going to educate key stakeholders, and we're going to amplify community voice from the ideation stage all the way through to policy implementation. And what we ask of you in return, slides are a little bit delayed. So we ask that leaders share and adopt best practices on healthy water infrastructure implementation. Support full lead service line replacement with timelines and delivery plans. We want to get to the action component of all of this as well. We want to increase investment and resources. And we know that if we do these things and we start to make movement on addressing aging water infrastructure, there will be more jobs. And so we need to talk about equitably distributing those jobs and workforce development and authentic public engagement that brings everybody to the table. Thank you for this opportunity to speak, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Crystal. That was a fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it. And now we're going to hear from Secretary Preston Cole from Wisconsin. Preston, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Can you see everybody see me?
I cannot see you.
And they have control of my camera.
They have taken control. All right, we need to see Preston. There's Preston. Okay, I'm going away. Thank you, Preston.
Great job, Crystal. Thanks for the shout out. Certainly for folks in the Milwaukee Commons, we work diligently with them. But I'm coming to folks on the call today from the shores of Lake Michigan and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I'll just remind folks that the Milwaukee Bucks are the world champions and will be returning to the court in short order. Also, the Milwaukee Brewers, for those of you who follow baseball, just finished winning the North Division, and Major League Baseball puts us in the league for trying to win a World Series. And also, about an hour up the road, at Whistling Straits, the United States, certainly golf, took home a winning Ryder Cup trophy. So great things are happening here in Wisconsin. All ain't well. Let me tell you, there's a whole lot that we have left to do. And because what I'll be talking about impacts primarily people of color, and certainly in our major cities, but certainly folks in rural America. So on behalf of Governor Tony Evers, he certainly is a stalwart for the Year of Clean Drinking Water, which is every year. We spend a lot of time and energy creating programmatic approaches to solving some of our water issues that both resonate in rural Wisconsin and urban Wisconsin. We also have a divided government, which creates opportunities, but also creates challenges. And so with that, let me begin. You can go to the next slide. Well, at the Wisconsin DNR, we're certainly charged with protecting the people of this amazing state and our natural resources. It's a both job that my staff and I both take very seriously, and I'm going to share with you why we take it seriously. Next slide. Wisconsin is home to 84,000 miles of rivers and streams, approximately 15,000 lakes, 800 miles of Great Lakes shoreline, 190 miles of Mississippi River shoreline, and over 5 million acres of wetlands. Folks, we truly have something wonderful and special here in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, clean water is not something all Wisconsinites have access to, which is why we are dedicated to ensuring Wisconsinites have safe, clean drinking water. Next slide. At the heart of our mission is making sure that we bring together diverse perspectives and relying on the science to inform our decision making. We know that low-income communities, Black and brown communities, and our tribal brothers and sisters are often the hardest hit when it comes to pollution. That's why environmental justice is an important issue and an important part of the work that we do to protect our land, our air, and our water, especially for those who have lived and worked and played in the closest sources of pollution. To combat this issue, we're working with our Department of Health Services and other partners to make sure that the water is safe today and future generations. Next slide. One of the areas that we're focusing on is PFAS contamination. And I certainly know that folks on this call know this all too well. Liesl and her team have certainly been leading the upper Midwest with the work that they do. Hats off to what Liesl and her staff are doing. We get to pay attention and pay sheer attention to what they're doing. And hopefully we can turn the corner as Michigan is beginning to do as it relates to PFAS contamination. It's bad stuff, folks. PFAS are human man-made chemicals used for decades and found in a variety of products that we all use, from non-stick cookware to fast food wrappers and certain types of firefighting foam, correct? These forever chemicals are a public health concern that build up in our systems, build up in our soil, seep into our groundwater, and are carried through the air. They're also known to build up in fish and wildlife tissues and even our bodies, which pose several health risks and cause certain types of cancer, heart issues, and there's certainly developmental delays in children. In Wisconsin, we have approximately 35 active sites with PFAS contaminations. And folks, that's 35 too many. Next slide. At the DNR, we've undertaken several measures to mitigate PFAS pollution in Wisconsin, including establishing the Wisconsin PFAS Action Council in 2020, which spearheaded the statewide PFAS action plan, issuing fish consumptions and advisories, and providing clean drinking water for residents after PFAS was recently discovered in private drinking wells most recently. Next slide. Studies have found that PFAS has disproportionately impacted communities of color and low-income communities. In rural and urban communities that have the effects of this contamination have costed a huge toll, not only on the economy in those communities, but the health impacts in those communities. In rural communities with homeowners having private wells or cities that have municipal wells, sampling or filtration systems may require out-of-pocket purchases. And folks, quite frankly, they can't afford it. PFAS contamination across this country tends to coexist with other pollution and contamination. And as a building code official prior to coming to the DNR, we know that lead pipes is an area of concern, but so is lead paint. It's a double whammy for folks who live in these homes. The highest levels of PFAS contamination in some states have been found certainly in many disadvantaged communities. We have to do something about that. And of course, near our airports. Next slide. Another area that we want to focus on is on our lead service line replacement. There's approximately 20,000 lead service lines across the state of Wisconsin that need replacing, and nearly 130 cities, towns, and villages. Well, such pipes can lead to problems in our drinking water, causing serious health concerns, including brain damage and young children and their ability to learn. Lead poisoning is a risk statewide. However, our Black and brown communities have its highest rates. Next slide. There are roughly 70,000 residential lead pipes located throughout Milwaukee alone that deliver unsafe drinking water to Black and brown and Latino communities. Exposure from lead and aging water pipes is certainly a public health crisis that requires a proactive approach. So we're going on offense. What does that mean? In Wisconsin, the DNR is providing $63 million to assist communities with lead service line replacements. We need an equitable distribution of funding to replace and upgrade this infrastructure for all of our communities. Ratepayers cannot be expected to carry the burden themselves. Next slide. Our dedication to clean water and protecting the people of the state of Wisconsin doesn't stop with PFAS or lead lines. Nitrates and pathogens from fertilizer and manure spreading is a growing area of a concern. And being an FFA kid out of Michigan, I can tell you that our cities, towns, villages, rural areas are all encumbered by a myriad of lead laterals, PFAS contamination, manure spreading issues in groundwater, and certainly nitrates. Everybody is in harm's way, but we're going to work. Pathogens can cause contaminations, and excess nitrates in drinking water cause a wide range of health problems, including blue baby syndrome. State test results indicate that tens of thousands of private drinking wells in Wisconsin have water unsafe to drink due to high nitrate levels. Next slide. Contaminated private drinking wells are especially problematic here in Wisconsin. Nearly 1 in 3 Wisconsinites get their drinking water from private wells, compared to just 10% of Americans nationwide who get their water from private wells. Since private wells are largely unregulated in our country, wells certainly, and once they're put in after construction, that's basically it. You're on your own, folks, after that. That's why we will continue rulemaking for targeted performance standards in areas of Wisconsin that are the most susceptible to nitrate contamination and where rural families are suffering the most. Next slide. Within the DNR, various groups are working on unpacking the realities of environmental justice in our state so we can be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. For example, we're working with a number of stakeholders and partners to clean up the Milwaukee Estuary area of concern on Lake Michigan. Though these groups have worked together for years to improve water quality in the area, this once-in-a-generation opportunity for a significant restoration investment in the Milwaukee community, and the organizations themselves have doubled down on their commitment to work together. There's a 10-member committee, which is ensuring the capture of the diversity of the individuals in the community: race, age, gender, and geography, and of course, experience, all with ensuring equity and inclusion front and center on all the decision making. While we are leveraging the energy in Milwaukee and the momentum in the area of concern, environmental justice needs to be addressed throughout the state. Next slide. Throughout the pandemic, my staff never stopped answering the call for public service, all while being more than safe. This includes the cleanup of historic PCBs in the lower Fox River after 17 years. 17 years of PCB laden, ground contaminated soil. And you know what? The other piece is part of that estuary is beginning to see, birds and aquatic species that we haven't seen for generations returning back. The project removed 6.5 million cubic yards of contaminated sediment through a hydraulic dredging. Next slide. Whether grappling with the challenges associated with COVID-19 or the critical work needed to make sure that every Wisconsinites can confidently turn on their tap to drink the water, we stand with the people of the state of Wisconsin. We're here, but we also know we have a lot more work to do. With open hearts and open hands, we are the humblest, and we will continue to be humble in our approach to make sure that these systems we manage protect the most vulnerable among us. Folks, thank you for having me. I look forward to the discussion. And for Liesl, Bruno who? Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Preston. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. And I always love your approach to servant leadership. I'm often taking notes when I listen to you talk, so appreciate that. And to close out our panelists, our final speaker is from the Michigan Municipal League Foundation. And we're lucky to be joined by Helen Johnson. Helen's got a lot to share with us about success stories that we've seen and about questions that we still have. And I do want to make sure that I'm encouraging people to start putting questions in the Q&A. because we're going to have a chance to ask these experts their opinion on things in just a moment. So please be thinking about that. Helen, floor is yours.
Liesl, thank you so much. And God, I just have to say how incredibly honored I am to be a part of a panel where Crystal and Preston are talking, in addition to Ridgeway, and just really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the Michigan Municipal League and the MML Foundation. I do want to make sure you know who we are. We're 123 years old, founded in 1899. The Michigan Municipal League is dedicated to making Michigan's communities better by thoughtfully innovating programs, energetically connecting ideas and people, and actively serving members with resources and services, and passionately inspiring positive change for Michigan's greatest centers of potential, its communities. We advocate for our community members in Lansing, in DC, and in the courts. We provide educational opportunities for elected and appointed municipal officials, and we assist our leaders in administering services to their communities through programs and services. Specifically, also, the MML Foundation is a mere 30 years old in comparison to the League, and we were created to be the philanthropic arm of the Michigan Municipal League. And we work to advance community wealth building in local municipalities through the support of residents and partnerships that do bold place-based work to creatively and intentionally bring people together around collective purpose. We also seek to provide grant opportunities to support and build community wealth. We want to connect communities with funding opportunities and strategic connections. And we want to build partnerships to fix our state's broken municipal system, which I actually am going to talk just a little bit about today. So want to share with you, I'm going to move to the next slide. And my understanding is this takes just a second, so bear with me, that it's important that we understand the context that all of what Crystal and Preston talked about is happening in. We in Michigan are really subject to decades of decline and compounding stress because, oops, did I just fast forward that? Let me go back. There we go. Okay. So if you're familiar with Prop A and the Headley Amendment, you know that what that has done is create revenue sharing gaps. And that's probably a nice way of saying this, that have made our communities really, really struggle. So when you look at what's happened in the last 20, I'm not advancing that, I'm not sure why that's happening. What's happened in the last 27 to 44 years, depending on when you want to look at Prop A or the Headley Amendment, our communities have lost $8.6 billion in municipal revenue from over 20 years of state underfunding. And I'm going to say that again, but $8.6 billion lost. Now, when you're losing that degree of revenue, you can't keep your police on, you can't keep your fire on, and you certainly can't update your infrastructure, which then leads to the kind of aggregated disinvestment that you've seen and you've heard about today. That's why we have all of these incredible infrastructure issues. Then a global pandemic strikes. So what we saw when the global pandemic struck was that it happened on top of this incredible political division that we were already seeing, and everything became political. Our Michigan GDP fell 41%, and this was all again on top of these structural financial issues that we saw. I'm going to advance to the next slide on purpose now. So what we're seeing now is this real attitude of scarcity. Everything seems like a zero-sum game in our communities. That's on top of the disinvestment and the incredible distrust in government that our communities are feeling right now. With that lack of trust and the limited capacity, when we look at the assistance that is available, it really is inaccessible in many ways and unaffordable. And what do I mean by that? Michigan ranks last nationally in the number of water systems that are awarded SRF, which is State Revolving Fund loan. Technical assistance was identified as one of our community's greatest needs. If you talk with the incredible folks at Eagle, what they'll tell you is that people just aren't applying. And we've got to figure out why that is. And so the initiative that I'm going to share with you today, really funded by the Mott Foundation and the Joyce Foundations, is going to try and get at the root of some of those problems and understand why the applications aren't happening and assist with getting the applications in, both for the State Revolving Fund, but also for the ARPA dollars that are out there and the coming infrastructure bill. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. One thing that I really want to acknowledge, because I think it needs to be explicitly said, and Crystal said this and Preston said this, but our larger communities are disproportionately going to get more of our SRF awards. And usually those are because they have more white residents that are receiving them. Those water systems are home to majority white communities. They tend to have higher quality and more affordable water services and better investment in infrastructure. You know, our ideas on race can lead policymakers to frame up problems facing high minority communities as a product of their own failings, which is incredibly unfair. And subsequently, they may view investments in those areas as financially riskier than in otherwise similar communities. If you want to look at the definition of disadvantaged communities that we have, it's an incredibly long definition, and I think it's one that we sort of understand anecdotally, but we do have some outdated state policy that really prevents communities from leaping across those barriers that are in place, because it may increase it may decrease their bond rating. I'm not going to talk about the cost of emerging contaminants because I feel like Preston and Crystal really covered that so well. But what you see is that we have communities that are stuck in what feels like a very unproductive cycle. So what do we want to do now? And I'm going to talk about some of the way that we as the Michigan Municipal League and Foundation have been approaching largely these systemic issues. And then I'm going to drill down on what our initiative is that I want to talk a little bit about today. So as we saw the CARES Act drop right after the pandemic hit, we knew what our communities were looking at as far as not having the type of bench that was going to be able to complete the application. We put in, and I'm going to tell you this because I think the return is incredible, we put in $100,000 to bring on a suite of consultants who could assist our communities, do technical assistance to help our communities, our 520 plus member communities, apply for federal funding that was out there. That $100,000 leveraged $33 million in return. And that's a pretty nice return. I don't know if you like baseball, but that's a good ROI, good batting average. And what we know too is that there's right now $6.4 billion available at the state. And our local government, between all of our different municipalities, have about $4.4 billion that they can spend through ARPA funding. We are thrilled that only 10 of our communities didn't apply for the ARPA dollars, and it was really because they just didn't have, it was a little bit too much of a lift for the amount that they were going to be getting back. We have entitlement communities that are getting a lot of money, and we have non-entitlement communities that are not getting a lot of money. But what we're encouraging them to do, and what we did at our convention that was in Grand Rapids last week, was really talk with our communities about how do they work around regional plans, and how do they not think about just their backyard as a way to spend the dollars that they have. And I'll tell you something that one of our members told us that was incredible. She walked into the meeting, we had a day-long workshop with our board, walked into the meeting and said, I have one project that my $100,000 of ARPA funding is going to cover. That's what we're going to do with it. She walked out of the meeting saying, I need to lock arms with my regional neighbors on infrastructure issues because my $100,000 plus their $99 million is going to make all the difference in the world, but we can't do what we need to do if we don't lock arms on this. So how do we think about the federal funding that we have in front of us right now in the sort of larger context of the huge systemic issues that our communities are facing, and create transformational catalytic investments? So what we've done is really continue that technical assistance. We've thought about how we can go a bit deeper. We're partnering with the National League of Cities to bring on this amazing data tool that they have that helps communities map. And this is something that they're doing across the Great Lakes region. They did it funded by the Joyce Foundation in the South. They're bringing it to the Great Lakes. They can map what's happening in communities for early childhood education, for infrastructure issues that relate to water, all the things we're talking about today, and the demographics of the community that's there. What we want to do is also help communities do a data walk and understand what the lived experience of their community is as it relates to these large infrastructure issues, and think long term again about those catalytic and transformational investments in infrastructure. that can really work to solve the problem and not just put a Band-Aid on it. And when you see the third goal here and it says communications assistance, that's not just tweeting about what kind of good things are happening. What that means is that we want to address the distrust that communities do feel in government and help them to communicate about the authentic engagement that really should be happening, that is happening in some places, and to make sure that community voice and community vision is a part of the decision-making process about how you spend the dollars that are coming down from the government. We're going to go to the next slide. Why does this matter? So climate migration is one of those things that if you're in the Great Lakes area, you know it's coming. Everyone knows it's coming. And it was interesting because about 2 months ago, and Dave Natsker, who introduced this, knows this is true because I emailed him a contact with one of the young fellows that used to work with me about 20 years ago. And he lives in Colorado right now, and he emailed me out of the blue and said, I'm sitting here looking out my window where I used to be able to see a mountain, and I can't see it now because the wildfires are blowing the smoke so heavily across our region that the things that we used to be able to do here and see here are not visible any longer. How can I move to the Great Lakes area? I know that people are coming. I know that there's water there. How do I get there, and how do I start making a difference? He's one of a lot of people who are thinking the same way. And as we think about the climate migration that is coming and the issues that we have around both our water infrastructure and additionally our other infrastructure, it's all locked together. And we value the notion of community wealth building at the League, which means that you can't do things in a silo. So if you're thinking about the water infrastructure, then I think Preston or Crystal mentioned this, you have to think about the green jobs that necessarily need to be created, particularly in communities that haven't had access to green jobs or the training that's required to do those. So thinking about the economic impacts of the investments that need to be made, thinking about the creative voice of communities and the culture that needs to be maintained. The League put on policy forums about 1.5 years ago and brought in Dr. Victoria Herman to talk about when people lose their sense of place, when flooding happens, when infrastructure breaks down, their culture breaks down with it. And as we think about people coming here because that's happened, we're going to have to think about the issues of arts and culture and how they relate to issues like water, which is not something that we always like to think about. We're also going to have to think about how we clean up our act in multiple other ways. But at the core of all of those things, making sure that our communities understand that they belong in this place and that there is trust there. And that only happens when we work together. You don't talk about trust and see it happen. You have to do work to create trust. And the value of land is also very important as we think about who owns land, particularly when it has access to water and natural resources, making sure that that value is leveraged by the local community and not an international corporation who can't work on the shores they've been working on anymore, but making sure that that's something that the local communities can continue to leverage. So let me tell you about this project briefly, because I know I'm going to run out of time. We have this incredible opportunity to work with disadvantaged communities across Michigan, again, funded by the Mott Foundation and the Joyce Foundation, to help those communities access state revolving funds, the infrastructure funds, think about the use of their ARPA funds, and do it in a way that simplifies the process. Right now, this process is very complex, it's very difficult, and typically when communities do get money, they spend a lot of that money on hiring consultants to come in, write the applications, and then paying the consultants. So the process needs to be simplified. We're going to listen very carefully to try and understand where our communities are and how their experience with the existing programs operates while we're helping them to get more relationships built between the state and their local municipality. We want them talking to each other. We want there to be good back and forth and good flow, because that trust is incredibly important. We also want to see local capacity get built. Sometimes this just seems like Greek. If you don't have the pipeline of folks who've been trained, who understand how to do these applications, how to acquire the dollars necessary to improve infrastructure, then we're in a sustainability sort of loop, that an unsustainable sustainability loop. So the other thing is that we've got to have our communities really have a better understanding of what the larger Michigan and regional water systems look like. And as they think about really utilizing the state revolving fund, thinking about, again, those partnerships that are going to be absolutely necessary to maintaining the programs as they move forward is incredibly important. We're going to be looking for 2 contractors to come in and work with us on this program. We've started to spread the word. We would appreciate you helping us to spread the word. We think this process and this project are very much a part of our Serve My City platform, because we want to make sure that communities have access to the technical assistance and to the planning that they need in order to be successful acquiring the funds that will help with water affordability. The other piece of it that I want to share, and I shared this right before the panel started, again, with our Grand Rapids convention that we had last week, we had another really interesting comment from one of our members saying that there was a water scare in their elementary school. And because of that, the entire community is now scared of the water system. And she said this was something that had to do with a water fountain. And granted, there are huge issues with pipes all over the place, but this was a contained issue. But the fear that it caused in the local community caused everyone to start buying bottled water. And then that, of course, reduces usage, which makes water more expensive. She also has Main Street businesses that have closed down. So they're not pulling water like they used to. Now, when you decrease water usage in a community, what happens? The water gets more expensive. So the communication about where our water systems really are and making sure data-driven conversations are a part of what we're telling ourselves and what we're telling our communities becomes incredibly important. We've got to be honest about where we are and where we're going, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's got to just be the honest truth. So that's what I've got for you today. Happy to answer questions as we move into the next phase.
Oh, thank you so much, Helen. What a great point. And we were having a little bit of a chat about that challenge ahead of time, and also making the comment that I think many folks are aware that bottled water is not regulated in the same way that water systems are. And so when we're thinking about, you know, what people are using, that's an added layer of complexity too. So these were really wonderful presentations from Crystal to Preston to Helen. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to kick it off with one question. I've heard themes about making sure that we're listening directly to communities, which I think is, you know, such a critical part of our equity work, and our focus on making sure we're really delivering for communities. We've heard a lot about collaboration, and I think that the point that Helen was just making about how do we maximize dollar spend so that it really impacts to a greater extent, that collaboration, relationships, and trust are so important for that. But I'm going to zoom us out to the 80,000 foot level for a second, and I would like each of our panelists to give a recommendation or a direction for the council to think about. How can the council best take activities to support the concepts that we're all talking about here? So improvements in water infrastructure investments with a focus on equity, and keeping first and foremost those relationships so that we really impact both from a drinking water perspective and a clean water perspective. So I'm curious if you all would have recommendations. So let's start, Helen, if I might ask you, just because I know you just finished, I'll ask you first, and then both Preston and Crystal as well.
Hi, Liesl, thank you so much. And I think you're right. We've got to think about I think what you're asking is how we engage our leadership to create the kind of trust and belonging in communities that builds opportunity, right, and maximizes what we have. So here's a thought, and I think we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. The first issue is that when there's new money on the table, the first thought that we have is, good, we can fix some of the things that we've had on the books and we can spend this money really fast. And what we're saying is, let's take a breath and let's have the actual conversations that we need to have with communities that have the lived experience with the issues. Vulnerable communities are solving problems every day and thinking about figuring out what kinds of solutions they're coming up with and what kinds of solutions could be taken to scale is a first step in really listening and understanding that. Bringing your corporate and business community, your small business community to the table, who are also solving problems every day and thinking about the role that their employees, their team members play in communities is important. And bringing philanthropy to the table is critically important as well. So in a nutshell, what I'm talking about is creating cross-sector tables, because we can't solve problems in silos anymore. We can't just decide that we have a solution and it's the right thing to do. We have to bring together different sectors. We have to understand how these infrastructure, and I will say particularly with issues of infrastructure and water, this is affecting everyone. So how is it affecting everyone? What are the ways that they may be doing workarounds right now, that they're circumventing the problem? And what are their learnings that they've had that we can throw into the mix and begin to collaborate on effective solutions? And how do we sort of create stone soup opportunities? Which I don't know if you know Liesl, do you know the stone soup story? Just in case no one else does. It's one of those wonderful childhood stories where somebody comes to town and everyone's starving because it's the middle of a famine, which I think we can understand. And they knock on everybody's door and they can't get food. So they have a big pot. They ask somebody to throw a stone in there because it's a magic stone and it can create soup. And then somebody throws a carrot in, somebody else throws whatever in, and suddenly there's enough for everyone. And if we weren't so judgmental of each other right now, and if we had a little bit more forgiveness and grace and we're able to think about moving forward and throwing into the pot together, I think we could come up with some really interesting cross-sector solutions.
Great, thank you so much, Helen. Preston, thoughts about how do we build collaboration and regional solutions for water infrastructure challenges, making sure we're thinking about equity and environmental justice first and foremost?
Yeah, great question. Think about it this way. We're never alone. That if we go as a region, just imagine in front of the Senate, the Congress, infrastructure, and water committees, you had 8 governors there, David Natsker, being able to talk about the multi-millions of people in our region that are in harm's way as it relates to water quality, infrastructure, contaminants, and certainly chemicals in our groundwater systems. That tells a story. And while people may believe that, we can do this alone, folks, we can't do it alone. We have to leverage our regional assets and the political will that we have on both sides of the aisle to raise attention. And so continue to articulate and argue for what happened to the Great Lakes Czar. Bring him or her back, because we have to have someone fighting on our behalf. And since we're never alone, what can we do as a region? Because we have the area of concerns that we're all dealing with, and that is unified with all our regions. But when it comes to clean drinking water, diversity, equity, inclusion, who's in harm's way? Gary, Indiana, Benton Harbor. So our region is able to tell a unique story about the myriad of issues, but the quantity of people. That will raise eyebrows, I believe, and hopefully get Congress and Senate working on solutions to help our governors be able to move the needle on clean drinking water.
Great, I appreciate that. And another vote for the work to unite us. So, Crystal, I think I'm really curious in your insights onto this as we kind of close it up, and I'm grateful that you get to take us home.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think there are a number of things at play here. We keep talking about bringing folks to the table, and one of the members of our board at the Alliance, Joelle Mogerman, says it best, that we probably need to break the table because it was never designed to fit all of the people that really should be in as part of these conversations anyway. And so when we talk about that, we need to talk about being courageous enough to disrupt systems so that we can face and really repair inadequacies, inequities, inequalities that have existed over time. I think there are a few different things that play really briefly. Authentic community engagement, which doesn't mean just bringing people in at the end of the project to say, how do we do? Is it good? We don't even have a forum for you to provide feedback and actually adapt the feedback that we're soliciting. It's actually starting to talk to community at the ideation stage about the potential implications of policy decisions, and really centering the lived experience as expertise. Nobody can talk better about these issues than the people that are dealing with them on a daily basis. And one of the recommendations, tangible recommendations, because I think that's always important. We talk about these things very conceptually. One of the tangible recommendations I have is that we get environmental justice leaders from across the region to meet with the governors on a regular basis. What is the forum for these conversations? So we can talk about the policy proposals and how that really translates in communities, to talk about the solutions that people have and what the challenges that people are facing on an everyday basis. We need to open the lines of communication.
Thank you, Crystal. I think that re-emphasis on lived experience is so critical, and I like the concept of break the table. That's a good one. So, okay, David, I hand it back to you. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you all today.
Thank you very much, Director Clark, and to all our panelists. As you can tell, there was a lot of energy in this conversation, and we want to channel that energy into action, and we look forward to working with all of you on next steps and on follow through. If you've not already, we encourage you to visit our website and register for some of our upcoming webinars in the Leadership Summit series, www.gsgp.org. We have sessions coming up on impact investment, invasive species, and the economic development opportunity of carbon. We again thank our sponsors, and we look forward to continuing to work with them and all of our partners. As noted previously, a recording of today's presentation and all the slides will be posted to our website, and we would ask that you please share it with anyone who may be interested. So again, thank you very much to our panelists, to our moderator, and all of you for joining us today. Thank you.